Welcome to the American Planning Association podcast. This episode is part of our series on planning the autonomous future, which looks at the many ways in which autonomous technology will impact our cities and regions, mobility, and the planning profession. I'm your host, Jennifer Henaghan, Deputy Research Director and Manager of the Green Communities Center at the American Planning Association. With me is my co-host, Kelley Coyner.
I'm Kelley Coyner. I'm the CEO of Mobility E3, a new technology consulting firm that focuses on helping communities make sure that automated mobility makes them more accessible, healthier, and safer places to live.
In this episode, we'll be focusing on infrastructure. Our first guest today is Rebecca Hunter from Crown Castle.
Can you tell us a little bit about Crown Castle?
Sure. First, thanks for having me. We're always excited to talk about infrastructure. So, Rebecca Hunter with Crown Castle. We are the largest shared telecommunications infrastructure provider in the U.S. We have cell phone towers, small cell infrastructure, fiber, and edge data centers. So we focus really what we think is on an end-to-end connectivity solution from an infrastructure perspective.
Why should a planner care about infrastructure when it comes to autonomous vehicles?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, and that's definitely something that we talk to planners and cities about, that when you look at connected autonomous vehicles, you think connectivity. There is a connected piece, an autonomous piece that requires both wireless and wired connectivity. And so when you're looking at overall, when you start thinking about planning for transportation in general, whether it be, again, autonomous or just regular transportation, what does your streetscape look like? What does your utility infrastructure look like? And so if they're planning for the streetscape or curb usage or, kind of repurposing a lot of that, without the right utility infrastructure in place, they're not going to be looking at it comprehensively or strategically. So really that planning phase now has to be in place as we evolve toward more and more connected and autonomous vehicles. So it really is a very important component of an overall transportation comprehensive plan.
And this is really new to the planning field.
Yes.
Because, historically, it's 9 times out of 10, when a planner is talking about infrastructure, that person is talking about roads, concrete, asphalt, curbs. Maybe we're getting into utility lines, but if that, it's probably water.
Yeah, and there's a lot of conversation right now, even at all levels of government, about infrastructure. What is infrastructure? And including broadband in the definition of infrastructure is something that has been evolving over the last couple of years. And we really think now is that time to make sure it is included. So when you're talking about spending money on streets, on roads, on sewer systems, on electric utilities, if they happen to own their own utility, you have to start adding in broadband, because that is what that's the new economy that people are looking at. You can't really have a conversation about transportation, economic development, public safety, or education, really all those use cases and verticals, without talking about wireless and wired connectivity within a municipality.
So some of the first autonomous vehicles obviously are working without broadband or without special extra sensors or connectivity. But what is it that's so important about having a stronger communications infrastructure when it comes to full deployment of autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, well, and as you look at more and more deployment of connected and autonomous vehicles at scale, right? There's a lot of pilot projects right now, and there is a lot of data that is shared, like the vehicle to vehicle, which was kind of the starting point for a lot of this connected vehicle. But as you move to autonomous vehicle, you think of the sheer amount of volume of data that not only that vehicle needs to operate and make independent decisions, but also how much data is that vehicle collecting as it's driving through, and how much useful data can be provided and shared with other vehicles, with the municipality about various conditions on the roads or intersections, safety. So it really comes down to what we think is really a public safety issue. You want to have safe, connected, and autonomous vehicles. And so to do that, to have the dense, connected infrastructure that's not just car to car, but vehicle to some sort of infrastructure, and a lot of that infrastructure is going to be in the rights of way through whether it be, like I said, the addition of data infrastructure that's already off the car, or, again, data that can be provided to the car from outside sources. So it's a public safety issue, as there's, more and more decisions. Like I said, we, mentioned that there's going to be a low latency requirement too.
Tell me what latency means.
Yeah, well, so the latency component of it is how fast does this data go from car to car or car to vehicle? And so when you think about a decision, how fast a car, like some of the examples that we use is, if a child, right, the ball rolls into the road, right, and a child goes out to try to get that ball. Well, if that's an autonomous vehicle, that car has to take that data and make an instantaneous decision to stop. If you're 1 second late, that could be a real problem, with the industry as a whole. And you want to make sure you prevent fatalities, injuries, accidents. And by doing that, you need to have very, very low latency decision-making criteria, which again comes back to the densification of infrastructure, both wireless and wired.
Can you describe for someone like me who doesn't really get it what densification means?
Well, densification is more of everything. So we are going to need more fiber connectivity, whether it be in the ground or pole to pole, depending on the situation. And it's going to be more sensors, more antennas, just a densified network that's going to be required wherever you have connected or autonomous vehicles. And it's going to serve not only, again, commercial uses, but municipal, kind of smart city and where transportation falls in that. But this is the conversation about, is there going to be an antenna or a sensor on every pole in a city? Is there going to need to be how much fiber? Do you have to have fiber to every home? Do you have to have fiber to every building? So it really is, how do you take network connectivity infrastructure deep enough to provide all these use cases that are going to be coming? And we really believe that transportation, if you look at it long term, as it goes from connected to autonomous, that densification, that real need for a lot of fiber, a lot of sensors, a lot of antennas is really going to be the foundation to make that a reality.
So I don't know if this is too simplistic, but is greater density, does that mean faster data speeds?
It could. That's definitely one of the hopes, I think, and one of the things you hear about 5G, which, again, has multiple definitions depending on who you talk to. But one of the definite improvements will be speed. The speed, and some of it, again, is going back to just consumers on their wireless devices. But also what it's going to be is machine to machine, or if you've heard, it's devices talking to devices, like cars talking to other cars, or cars talking to, a data center, again, making independent, decisions. So there is going to need to be improved speed, and a lot of that is going to be related to the need for, again, this more infrastructure, which is going to, take pretty much all the vertical infrastructure a city has and say, how can we use this in the best possible way to meet these ever-evolving demands for attachments on vertical infrastructure, and then fiber, whether it be in the ground, again, or attached to, poles.
Is there a city that's begun this process?
There are a lot of cities that have pilots, right? And I think that there's a lot of conversation about, different pilots in different places, and there are certain cities that are doing bits and pieces of this. If you look, one that comes to mind, Kansas City, they did their 2 linear miles of smart city, on their transit line. So, which was a great, idea and a great concept, and it's really, really working well. Boston has some very, very smart, intelligent intersections that they're looking to replicate. But I think one of the challenges is really taking these pilots and taking them at scale. There's really nothing at this point that's really at a city scale. And there's lots of different organizations that are trying to, coordinate, like, what was good about this pilot or that pilot. And from an AV perspective, the DOT has certain cities or certain...
The DOT?
The Department of Transportation has certain vehicle test beds or cities that they're working with, again, on these pilot programs. So a lot, I think, is going to be how do you take a great pilot program and take it really city scale? And, how do you take something that works in one corridor and say, okay, how does that then translate to a road that maybe isn't as straight, that hasn't been, replanned for a bus rapid transit or a new streetscape idea? How do you take it to suburban? And then there's a whole nother conversation, how eventually does this roll out to rural areas and places that may not be ready for it right now.
Well, clearly now we have an understanding of why this wireless infrastructure is important. But if you're a planner who's more accustomed to dealing with land use and zoning and those types of issues, where do you start?
I think when we talk to cities and planners, we talk to them first about comprehensive plan. So I think that really you have to have a vision of where you want to go. How do you, and you have to start incorporating these concepts, just like the conversations around AV and CV come, how do we do mobility as a service? How do we do streetscape or curb planning? The same concept needs to be included in that bigger picture of what do we want our utility infrastructure to look like? What do we want our kiosks or poles or this vertical bus shelters, whatever else? How do we look at this again as a whole inclusive, but you can't forget about the connectivity infrastructure piece when you're looking at a streetscape. And there has to be, flexibility on both sides, because at the end of the day, when we talk to planners and mayors and governors, everybody wants the technology. Everybody wants it to be safe and secure technology. But how do you really dig deep and have that next level of conversation? And I think it starts with a comprehensive plan, because I think it's hard right now. A lot of people are rewriting a lot of current planning code before they know where they want to go, before they have a vision. And so they're trying to make decisions and change things now, which then ultimately may not align with that future vision. And, and sometimes it is a hard conversation to have, because you really have to engage your community, from a planner perspective or a community perspective, because it is a lot about aesthetics and, how do you want to use a sidewalk, and how do you want to, have, the multimodal. But we think that, unfortunately, to some degree, that the conversation about this infrastructure piece is missing in that larger conversation. And I think if we could do one thing, or help with one thing, is to bring it to people's attention, to include it in that conversation, so that they can have that end goal that we all want, right? Integrated technology in a better living space.
Our second guest today is John Estrada from eTrans.
Hi, I'm John Estrada from eTrans Systems. We build software solutions for connected technologies, whether it's vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to pedestrian, or pedestrian to infrastructure.
Can you tell us about why you started eTrans?
Yeah, so I had a company that I was selling. The nature of that company was I wasn't going to go with it in the sale, and trying to figure out what was the next thing to do. This was about 5 years ago. And I concluded that the next thing was driverless cars, that they were going to totally change everything. And started doing a little more investigating and realized it was coming sooner than later, and that there were lots of opportunities. So that's why we, as we did that investigation, we learned more about connected technology. And that's really we formed eTrans, and that's really the focus of our company.
So there's been so much attention on, are the cars really driverless, and AV this and AV that, what level of AV is, that we've kind of lost a sense of perspective or a sense of sort of knowledge about this question about connectivity has been here for a long time. So can you tell me how connectivity connects with AVs?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, even today, people will say that their autonomous vehicles aren't connected, but they really are. They get GPS information. They share data on how the driving went. They get instructions on where to go. So even today, with with that information. They need that to move forward. In the future world, they can get a lot of benefit by getting information from other sources that they can't get from cameras and LiDAR. For example, you can use a camera to determine that the light is red, but you can't use it to know that it's going to turn green in 3 seconds. And if you slow your vehicle down just a little bit, by the time you get to the light, it'll be green, and that'll provide a better light. You can't see around the corner. With a connected vehicle technology, you can get that insight, get that information, and know that there is a vehicle coming another way.
So how does that work, seeing around the corner?
So the communications, the various technologies, DSRC, or dedicated short-range communications, is one. There's 5G, which is coming, the next generation cellular technology. And those technologies can go through walls. Think of it like the Wi-Fi in your house, right? So you get Wi-Fi, depending on your house, how well it works. But, in the room where the Wi-Fi is, it's great. As you get further and further away, it still works. It has a little more challenges. And this technology works the same way. So it can go through buildings up to a point, kind of go around the corner, and so you can get insight into that that you otherwise can't get with a camera or a LiDAR or radar.
So this would still be technology that would be on a vehicle. Is that right?
It's generally, so it's communication, so it's got to be in 2 places, right? It could be in the vehicle, right, to get that information, but the information's coming probably from infrastructure. So it could be a radio that's attached to the traffic light or an intersection. It could be tied to a camera system that's looking down the road or looking down the side road. It could be coming from a cell phone. So we have an application that's designed to help specifically the visually impaired get through intersections, right? I challenge everyone, the next time you're standing at a complex intersection, close your eyes and imagine getting across the street. Don't do it. I'm not recommending that. But just imagine what someone has to go through. So with the technology, we can connect from the cell phone to the cloud, connect the cloud to the traffic light so we know the information of when the light's green, when the pedestrian light is on, and then we can communicate from that to vehicles in the area so that vehicles can know that there's a blind pedestrian or a regular pedestrian in the intersection, and then the pedestrian can get information on their cell phone about the light. Yes, you have a green arrow to cross, or no, you don't. Or as you're wandering through the crosswalk, it can notify you that you're beginning to meander out of it. And the application vibrates. So
Is that what haptics are?
Yes, it's a haptic sensor. We specifically don't have it tell them because they're trained to listen. Like that's if you go through the training of how to get through an intersection, it's all, and obviously if you can't see, it's all based on hearing. So we didn't want to add to the volume of noise. So the phone will vibrate. And just like you can have different ringtones, you can have different vibration tones. Not exactly the right word, but and
different rhythms or different.
Yeah, and so it vibrates differently if you're meandering to the left or if you're meandering to the right. And look at intersections. They're not all north-south perfect right angles.
Sure.
There are all sorts of things, so it can be really helpful.
So it's not just about communicating with someone in a car or communicating to a car, but you can use the connected technology to communicate to pedestrians or bicyclists.
Exactly. Yeah. So people like simple acronyms. So everything's V2 something, vehicle to X is everything.
Sure. V2V.
Vehicle to V, V to I for infrastructure, V to P for pedestrians. Although other than vehicle to vehicle, most of it generally is coming the other way. It's the intersection giving information to the vehicle. It's the pedestrian giving information generally to the infrastructure and then to the vehicle. Not too many people have like DSRC enabled cell phones. Probably aren't. I'm sure there's some research scientists somewhere who do. But that's not something that's coming soon, but kind of by definition, a cell phone can speak cellularly. And so we'll use that communication and then other communications to the vehicle.
That makes a lot of sense that intersections are sort of the touch points, since theoretically that's where all these different vehicles and pedestrians and every transit mode is literally intersecting with one another. So that seems like a logical place where you would be getting this information from.
Well, and what's interesting in today's world, you think about vehicles and infrastructure, they don't really know anything about each other, right? Literally, that little place where the rubber hits the road is the only thing that a vehicle and the people who are planning infrastructure worry about. Because there's a human being who does all that interpretation. If you see a stop sign, it's the human being that tells the car to stop. You see a green light, it's a human being that says, hey, drive through. Well, as we move towards more autonomous vehicles, we need to replace that human being, not just to do the driving, but also with the other information that they're going to get. And this is the best way to pass that information on.
Are you working on other technologies like this?
Yes, so we work on vehicle-to-vehicle communications, so both with driven vehicles and with autonomous vehicles. So we could pass information to the autonomous vehicle on the light, how long is it going to be? We can do the math that says, hey, if you slow down to this rate, you can make it for a green light. We also do information like speed warnings, curve warnings, school zone warnings. We're doing emergency vehicle preemption, right? So as we know the emergency vehicle is coming to the light, we can control the light so it'll be green by the time it arrives. We can do transit vehicle prioritization. So it's an emergency vehicle, we're moving you to green. If it's a transit vehicle, well, yeah, we might.
Is anyone using this pedestrian safety technology on the street?
Yes, we're just rolling it out in a number of locations. So on a stretch of roads in Cary, North Carolina, on a corridor in downtown Las Vegas. Our office is in Northern Virginia. We have a couple of sites there, one at a Department of Transportation Research Center, but also at an intersection called Hilltop and Prosperity right outside of our office. And this is 2 roads, 2 lanes in each direction. Has an additional complication of there's a little cutout lane to make the right turn, so it makes the getting through the crosswalk a little more challenging. So we do that. We've actually bought our own blindfold and cane, and we practice it ourselves, although we do have a rule that you can't go by yourself and do that.
Probably a good rule.
It gives you a real sense of why this technology is needed. It's scary. It really is scary.
So in Las Vegas, is it in the same corridor where the Navia autonomous shuttle is running?
It's right near there.
Okay.
And so it's just in a, they wanted to put, that's their downtown tech corridor, of which that is part of it. And we are on another stretch of road, so they get more roadside units. So we also have DSRC, which is a dedicated short-range communications that can do the vehicle-to-infrastructure. So we're broadcasting out map message, which describes the intersection, and then the light information, which is called signal phase and timing, or a SPAT message.
A what message?
A SPAT, signal phase and timing, but you have to write it with a lowercase a.
It's very particular, I bet. So, can these technologies be used everywhere with the existing infrastructure that we have?
So you need the connectivity that we talked about earlier in the podcast, right? That's an important part of it. We need the cell phone will connect to an application in the cloud. So generally where we're looking at deploying these things, there's cell phone coverage, right? A very rural part of Montana, you really don't need help, additional information to get across the street. There's probably not traffic lights. But then you need the infrastructure because you need the intersections to be able to communicate back to a cloud-based system. And everyone wants to gather the data, right? At the end of the day, the data may be some of the most valuable things for things we haven't even envisioned yet, right? But today, they don't really know how many people cross intersections, how many people push the PED button to get across, and that sort of thing. So this is an opportunity to gather a lot more information, but you need that infrastructure, that connectivity to be able to do it well. And then if you add things like small cells, it can improve the accuracy of the GPS or the global positioning to make the applications even stronger.
I just think this is incredibly cool. I like the idea of the haptic feedback being used as sort of a rumble strip for pedestrians, which, that's just a really cool idea. Is that something that's at all involved in autonomous vehicle technology for at the stage we're at now for someone who's behind the wheel of a car but not fully in control, a level 2 or something like that?
There are similar things, yes. So in autonomous vehicles today, or even driven vehicles, they can look to see if you're wandering out of the lane, and you'll get, won't be your phone vibrating, but you can get haptic feedback. A lot of times it's like in the seat itself, you'll get a little poke. And in fact, I think one of the things that's interesting, I've been in one, and if you're wandering or you have an issue to the right, it'll only poke you in the right side. Oh. And your natural reaction is to sort of jerk forward, but only that way. And in doing that, you turn the wheel a little bit and kind of push yourself back in. So yeah, and one of the biggest challenges, of course, in all this, as long as we have drivers, is how do you communicate with the driver in such a way that it's meaningful and not distracting?
Right.
Right. Everything's a big trade-off there. That's a challenge. You get away from that a bit once you start to get autonomous vehicles. But
what's on your wish list for other ways to use this technology?
There's a whole variety of things. So one of them, for example, one of the big challenges, of course, all over, especially in Northern Virginia where I live, is traffic. Right. And there's limited funds for building new roads, and it does seem to be the more new roads you build, people just fill those up just as quickly. Using the connected vehicle technology will allow something called platooning, and if you combine that with autonomous vehicles, it will allow vehicles to ride much closer together, much safer, right? So today you need to leave a gap. People don't usually leave enough gap, is a bit of a challenge. And so if you can do that, you can fit a lot more cars on the same roads at higher speeds. So that's one of the big things I think we'll really start to see the benefits. I kind of foresee, we have things like hot lanes today. Hot lanes, I think, will be a good starting point for autonomous vehicle lanes that can platoon, run closer together. It also will help with trucking, right? There's a shortage of truck drivers today. They have, limited number of hours that they can drive for good reason. But if you can platoon trucks, you can get much more freight moved at lower costs. I think the connected vehicle, there'll be connecting bikes, so providing information on that, providing information to the light that a bike is coming. So, because the bike probably not going to slow down anyway when it goes through the intersection. So at least we can, provide some information, provide information to vehicles. So I think it's a real opportunity to make our roads safer and to save fuel. Right? If I can tell you to slow down ahead of time, every time you hit your brake, you're wasting gas. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John and Rebecca, for being with us today and telling us a bit about the things we need to be considering in terms of infrastructure that we'll need to get to this connected and autonomous future that we're moving towards.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of the American Planning Association podcast. You can listen to past episodes at planning.org/podcasts. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Have an idea for a podcast? Email them to podcast@planning.org.